So, it's official. I have an autism diagnosis. That sentence has taken me a while to get my head around. Now it is a certain reality. After a 6-month wait, the assessment and the outcome all happened fairly quickly, and I didn't want to rush back here with a quick I got diagnosed and goodbye video. I want to keep documenting the journey for those of you who are in the same boat or learning about autism. So today, I'm going to tell you what actually happened after my last video. Literally 10 minutes after that, I had my difficult, probing, hour-long observation. Then the next day, a 3-hour interview about life history that somehow wasn't as hard. Then 2 weeks later, a phone call to confirm the result. Then another fortnight later came the lengthy report, a 31-page report that came with a warning. And honestly, it needed the warning because reading it was one of the strangest, most confronting and most validating experiences of my life. So let me walk you through it. In my last video, I told you I was about to have my assessment. I had found it difficult to prepare for and did my best not to deal with it until the last minute. The ADOS2, they call it, it's the observation part, and I had it over video call. On paper, it sounds fine. A conversation, telling a story from a picture book, describing a routine like making a cup of tea. But here's what the report later said about that session. And reading this back was a punch to the gut. For example, Sam would provide extremely long answers and would go off topic. And at times, the examiner had to intervene and move Samuel on to the next task. It also said most attempts by the examiner to establish conversations were met with long monologues by Samuel about the topic. And this one really got to me a little bit. The examiner provided several cliffhangers and conversational hooks throughout the assessment, and Samuel did not engage in asking for further information. Only once did Samuel ask about the examiner's experiences. I didn't realise I was doing any of this in my head. I was being thorough. I was answering the questions properly, but the report shows me clearly, clinically, that I wasn't having a conversation. I was delivering information. That was hard to read, but it was also true. The next day, I had the second part, the ACIA, the clinical interview. This was about my life history, my childhood, my education, my relationships, my work, and weirdly, this one felt a lot better. It was 3 hours long, but it didn't feel as draining as the previous one that was just an hour. Because it wasn't about testing me, it was about listening to me. The clinician asked about school, about university, about the time I walked out from work years ago because I felt unsupported, about friendships, and about my wife and relationships. And I just talked for hours. And someone wrote it all down in the relevant boxes. It didn't matter if I went on a tangent. That session honestly felt like therapy, like someone finally asking the right questions. The research I had already done that formed the content for my first 5 videos about this really helped me articulate my experiences. Then I waited a couple of weeks and the phone rang. The call itself was brief. The multidisciplinary team had met. We can confirm a diagnosis of autism spectrum condition. A full report will be sent to you in a couple of weeks. And then the clinician said something I wasn't expecting. She said the report can be quite hard to read. Take your time with it. She also used the word impairment, which was the first time I'd really thought about it that way. But I thought I knew what she meant. Actually, I didn't. When the report arrived, 31 pages, it started with a summary, then it went through everything. My AQ score, 49 out of 50, my EQ score, 8 out of 32, both firmly in the autistic range. But the hard part wasn't the scores. The hard part was reading about the observations. For example, Samuel's speech had little variation in pitch and tone, rather flat but not obviously peculiar, and Samuel did not direct a range of facial expressions to the examiner. He presented with the same neutral facial expression, which made it difficult for the examiner to interpret his effect. When asked a question, Samuel would provide extremely long answers and would go off topic. I read those lines and thought, is that really me? Have I been walking around for 40 years with flat tone and a neutral face, and nobody's told me or picked up on it? But here's the thing, the report also said things that made me feel seen. For example, Samuel described himself as a responsible and honest individual. He emphasised that he is not seeking a diagnosis as an excuse or a catch-all explanation, but rather as a means of developing greater self-understanding. And that's exactly why I did this. Not for an excuse, but for a framework. So some parts of the report were unexpectedly validating. Little details I'd never thought to mention, but that the clinician picked up on. For example, Samuel reported a long-standing habit of picking and biting at a previously crushed fingernail, which has not regrown fully. I've done that for 15 years and never thought it meant anything until I started looking into autism. Samuel described a preference for items to be aligned, put in away or discarded rather than left disordered. The coat hangers in my wardrobe have to face the same direction. I thought everyone did that. Samuel noted that he can become stuck with collections he no longer feels interested in, but struggles to disengage from, which describes the boxes of Funko Pops I don't even want anymore, but I can't sell them because what if, I don't know. The report gave that a name, restricted interests. It's not just a hobby, it's a pattern. And this one made me laugh a little bit. Samuel reflected that at times he had drifted away from friendships after realising he preferred certain activities alone, and this has led Sam to some confusion about why he had previously initiated group gatherings. I have literally done that. Invited people over, then wondered why I invited people over. The report didn't judge any of this, and seeing it all written down by a professional, not as flaws, but more as features, was quite freeing and liberating. But before I could even think about what next, I had to do something that felt almost as hard as the assessment itself. I had to tell people, because here's the thing, you get this 31-page report that describes you more accurately than anything ever has. You spent months processing, researching, filming, reflecting, and then you have to look at your family, or your mate, or that colleague you've known for years, and you have to say, so, I'm autistic. And you have no idea how they're going to react. Of course, I've been masking all that time too, so it is confusing. You get a lot of people say that, well, if you're autistic, then I probably am, as they try and relate to you. Or that might just be like a passive-aggressive form of skepticism. I ended up putting a post on my personal Facebook, not because I wanted the attention, but because I had a lot of people in my life, and the thought of having that conversation 50 times individually was genuinely overwhelming. I described this as a coming out post that said for most of my family and friends, it'll make little difference. I'm still the same person, but it certainly helped me understand myself a lot better. I also offered support to anyone wondering the same thing about themselves. If they have questions about the process, or if they're thinking of starting their own journey, I'm happy to help wherever I can. Overall, the response was quietly reassuring. Most people just carried on, which is exactly what I said would happen. That was fine. Good even. But some people were sceptical. You get the raised eyebrow, the everyone's a bit autistic, aren't they kind of comments. You learn to just nod and move on. Not everyone needs a full explanation. Some people found it genuinely interesting. They asked questions about the process, about the report, about what it actually means day to day. And the ones who really mattered found it helpful as a means of understanding me a bit better and our relationship. A few friends have since reached out to say they're wondering about themselves, or that they're watching my videos and that they've started their own research. And I'm really enjoying that part of the process. The diagnosis wasn't just for me, it's become a way to help other people feel less alone. So if you're watching this and you're wondering about yourself and you haven't told anyone yet, take your time. You don't owe anyone a big announcement, but when you're ready, you might be surprised. Not everyone will get it, but the ones who matter, they will. So, that's where I am. Diagnosed, processed, slowly making sense of a 31-page document that describes me more accurately than I've ever described myself. So, what's next? What do you actually do after a diagnosis at 40? For me, it breaks down into about 4 general things that I'm hoping to centre my content around in future. One of them is to go more in depth into the diagnosis exams to help you prepare or give an idea of what to expect to hopefully reduce any worries that you might have about the process or help decide if you want to embark on the diagnosis. Also, one of the things I want to talk about is work and how it can affect you in your career. You will get a couple of recommendations in your report, and my main one was to inform work straight away and declare my diagnosis to my line manager and HR to explore reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act. That's a scary thought because once you tell them, you can't untell them. But the whole reason I started this journey was a workplace investigation. Something I said that I thought was factual was perceived as a criticism. The report calls this out directly, saying the workplace investigation arose from a comment Sam viewed as factual but was interpreted as a criticism or a slight against a colleague. So, the what next here is, do I tell them? Well, of course I did straight away. They already knew about my referral and I'd already been asking about getting clearer communication, written instructions and asking for a different way of handling feedback. And most importantly, especially now the diagnosis is confirmed, it gives you that protection. I'll do a video soon about how this diagnosis has helped me in my working life. And another thing I'll be talking about in future videos is looking back at the past. The report is full of moments from my life that I now see completely differently. For example, the PhD I quit because the presentations and peer discussions were difficult for me. The report says Sam ultimately discontinued his doctoral studies due to the stress associated with peer discussions and the presentation aspects of the course, which he found overwhelming. Looking back at instances such as the time I walked out from work a few years ago, which was kind of described as similar to a panic attack in my report, likely down to that sense of overwhelm. And also the way I've drifted away from friendships without understanding why. The report notes I preferred certain activities alone and found some things confusing. One of the most difficult questions I found hard to answer in my first assessment was the simple question, what is a friend? And that's a good question to maybe ask yourself if you're on this journey, and if you talk to someone about what you think a friend is and find yourself stumbling and not really understanding what you're saying, feeling self-conscious, anxious, that might be a good clue about whether you're autistic or not. I wasn't expecting that question, and it was certainly a difficult one for me to answer. And I want to make episodes about some of those things from the past, not to dwell on them, but to understand them a bit better, and probably people can relate to those big events in their life that they might have handled differently to what you'd say is a neurotypical person. And to help anyone watching who has their own version of these stories, I really want to do a video titled My Big Autistic Wedding, so look out for that one. And another topic I kind of want to focus on in my videos is just going back to those day-to-day signs and traits, because the report also caught things I'd never realised were autistic traits and confirmed some of the things I suspected from my journey of discovery videos, such as the fact that I sleep with a fan on every night, which, as the report noted, I've done since the age of 14. These small things, they're not quirks, they're part of the pattern. I want to keep making videos that point these out, because if you're watching this and wondering about yourself, it's not always the big things. Sometimes it is. Things you might have dismissed as OCD, everyone has something they're OCD about. There might actually be something else going on there. Sometimes it's the collections you can't let go of. Sometimes it's the way you feel relief when plans get cancelled. And that's just made me think, one thing you will need some support over potentially is contradictions, and it does help knowing other neurodiverse people to help with some of that. So, for example, as I just said, sometimes you relieve a social events cancelled because obviously you could find those stressful. But But then there's the other side of it where if you've built yourself up to something coming up that does get cancelled, actually it can be quite upsetting, and I think that's more true for an autistic person. They've put so much effort into getting themselves prepared for that mentally. It's quite difficult when plans change, and I am finding that quite hard to explain to some people, some things about autism where it sounds like you're almost making things up because you have an answer for everything, but actually there's some nuanced situations where you're trying to work out yourself as well what it all means. So that's something I definitely want to explore a bit further and try and get a better level of understanding for as I take a deeper dive in some videos. I've got autistic friends who, before I even realised I was autistic, they've reacted quite badly to even just changing the venue of a social event has really upset them, and I've never fully understood it at the time. But I can think of situations where I've been like that, where plans change, like it might be something minor, and I find it quite hard to adjust. But then other times I can quite easily go with the flow. It just depends. And I've realised when talking to neurotypical people that everyone can relate to a lot of these quirks, and you might get met with some scepticism as to whether this means you are autistic, but it's all the things together and the patterns that eventually all make sense under the umbrella of autism. And don't forget, you are an individual. We're not all the same as autistic people. We still have our own personalities and things that have shaped us throughout our life, like everyone else does. So it's not always an explanation for everything, but it does seem to have an effect on how we cope with certain situations, definitely. Let me know in the comments if there's that topic you are looking for to help in your own journey, and I'll prioritise discussing it in the content coming up. So, in summary, almost a summary of a summary, I'll go more in depth into the diagnosis process in upcoming videos, and I've already talked to work and wait to see if any adjustments will be made. But since my referral, it has already helped me having the knowledge that I could possibly be autistic, and I'll talk about how that's helped me just be a bit more mindful and change my approach to some things in my working life. And I'll look to revisit some things from the past and make episodes about what I find. And I keep noticing the small things and sharing them with you. Some extra traits I've come across, some things that people might be able to relate to. And again, in the comments, if there's things you're wondering, could this be an autistic thing? Let me know, maybe we can look into that together. And apologies for the delay since the last video. I needed that time to get my head around things and work out how I felt about everything, especially after reading the report. To be honest, when I first read it, it basically can make you sound a bit robotic, a bit inhuman, and all with logic behind it. It's quite a painful kind of reconstruction of yourself and what everything means. So it's really good to explore and build up that level of understanding. I needed that time, but I'm starting to get to grips with this now. And one thing I've not touched upon too much is, obviously I'm a dad of 3. It's good to have that knowledge in case any of these neurodivergent traits come up with your children, and just things to look out for. And it's also just good for that kind of level of understanding within a household. Like, we all have different dynamics, and it can help you just react that little bit sooner if you do sense, for example, you're being overwhelmed, or if you are coming across as unreasonable, you can maybe realise what you're doing before it gets to become a problem. Let me know in the comments what topics you want me to discuss in my future videos, your own experiences and the signs that have made you wonder if you're autistic. Let me know if what I'm saying is validating or even if it's challenging you. Thanks for watching, and as always, remember, you're not alone on this journey.